Anton, we're here on the Darug country, the home of the traditional custodians, the Burramadigal people of Western Sydney. And I've got lucky to interview you, Anton James from JMD Design. Tell me a little bit about yourself as a landscape architect and your background.
Well, I studied landscape architecture at UNSW 25 years or more ago. I then also studied a postgrad in visual arts at Sydney College of the Arts. And I worked in Europe for a few years before setting up Anton James Design in Sydney. And then 12 years ago, I formed a new practice with Ingrid Mather and James Delaney, my business partners currently, and that's JMD Design. And I also I'm a professor of industry at RMIT, and so I work there part-time and have a PhD from RMIT as well.
And how does Centenary Square fit into the body of work for JMD Design?
Centenary Square came along about 5 years ago, and we've always worked in the public realm. I mean, the office has always been focused on doing public projects. We haven't really chased the private and certainly not the domestic projects. So the office has been concentrating on greenfield housing projects and public open space. And Parramatta is probably one of the earlier, more urban projects that we did. So we became involved with Parramatta through the Design Parramatta workshops that were run by the government architect in 2012, I think, and we were asked to look at what was Church Street Mall and to revamp it. It was fairly tired. It had been closed and become a mall in 1985, and over that time, it just had started to become degraded and its use wasn't clear. So we were asked to look at this area of Parramatta in the mall in terms of how we might rethink it, and then we were asked to take those ideas and develop them further.
So what was the client's brief for this site?
Well, initially the brief change was quite volatile, but initially it was to tidy it up because they knew that Parramatta Square was coming and that in the longer term there would be a revitalisation of the whole centre of Parramatta. So they were a bit unclear as to whether they wanted to proceed with this before they had a design for the square, or they wanted to just tidy it up and make a sort of an interim public space. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, very late in the piece, they decided to go with a permanent sort of set the tone for the rest of Parramatta Square and do a quality piece of work that would, in a way, signal what Parramatta was to become. And so our brief was to clear out there was an amphitheatre, there was a playground, there was a raised garden bed with a sick tree, there was some public artwork. All of that had to be tidied up to make a space that was much more flexible and able to be used for their community events. They had Paul Kelly here playing on the opening, in their first few months of the opening, and they have the markets, they have the growers markets. So we work closely with the events people at Parramatta Council, mm-hmm. and obviously the design team. And we used the Parramatta palette, so they'd set a palette for the streets and for the public domain, and we were asked to work with that, and then we reinterpreted that, introduced the water as a climatic feature, yep. and kept the structure, just kept it quite simple.
I want to take a step back because I know there's some historic buildings that kind of abut the site here. So is there another part of the history of this square other than the more recent times that you can talk about?
Well, certainly the church behind us is very significant, and it's on axis here with Church Street, and it's also in the master plan for the square that was developed 20 years ago. It was also the cross axis of the square, or the main axis of the square focuses on the church. So the church is certainly central, but in designing it, we also very much appreciated the lower scale of the buildings surrounding this Centenary Square, the old clock, Centenary clock, and we didn't want to just corporatise it and make it all new and shiny, and really respect the quality of what was found. So particularly the church and the church lawn and the open space around the church, and the beautiful trees in the church grounds as well.
Let's talk about some of the other structural elements. What about the sense of arrival? How do you arrive at this square and move through the square?
It's an incredibly busy thoroughfare because of the station to the west of the south, and then Church Street. So you are brought through under a bridge, and then it opens out under the railway, and then it opens out and becomes wider. But in a way, this square itself is made up of a couple of components. There's the Centenary Square which is enclosed on three sides and has the Macquarie Street running along it, but then the next sort of subspace faces the town hall, and there's an offset relationship between the town hall and the church. So you come through that offset, alongside the garden to the church before arriving in this area in particular. And we look to treat that quite subtly to signal the sort of space, the placeness of this through the ground plane and also the catenary lighting above.
And more about the ground plane, there seems to be a lot of different patterns going on. Is that about creating a sense of legibility about transition to the edges and beyond the square?
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to really mark out, it's a way like rolling out a picnic rug, if you like. We wanted to mark out a space that had a particular special quality and even though the pattern is lively, but suggests a spot of stopping, a sort of a place within the bigger space. Bearing in mind that this material, this black granite, will be rolled out throughout the street, so it should be more than just a footpath, but less than its own, highly declarative space. And for that reason, we chose this pattern that is a bit like a ripple in the water, that again plays with the idea of the water feature. A bit like a rug, it really is like a woven rug, and sits around the clock.
Now the water feature's not on at the moment, but what was the idea behind including that in such a civic space?
Well, firstly, the microclimatic aspect, naturally, of having the water, but secondly, a playful element that could come and go and clearly could be turned off when there were big public events, and also an element that would draw people, a sort of incidental play area. We have some great photos of kids running through it, and it's the sort of thing that people interact with very easily. But then when it's turned off, you're back to a very simple, flexible square. It's also lit so that at night it has another dimension to it. And then it's a series of overlapping circles that make rooms, so it's quite playful. You can go and stand inside a room of water, sort of a cone of water, and then that circular pattern then wanders down through the rest of the square, bringing you into the space.
And so can you walk through that water, or is it just something to observe on the side?
No, the water is really highly interactive. There's a series of the jets are set in circles at 300 spacing, and they create a series of circular spaces that are varied, and the water's programmed, so it's highly programmed and can be changed for these rooms to come and go. And so the children, or whoever, can go into those rooms and be enclosed by water, and it's set on a sequence. So it's also set to the time of the day and set to the weather conditions, so that if it's windy it drops away, and then it can disappear altogether for setting up market stalls or events.
I love that you've brought that element of play into this square, but it's also really important in a time of climate change. We know that Western Sydney is roughly 6 degrees hotter than the Sydney CBD during the summer.
Yeah.
So actually being able to provide places that create microclimates is really critical for people that live out here, isn't it? Absolutely.
And because of that, we're specifically keen to maintain these trees as well. Plane trees are sometimes derided because of the lack of habitat, but they're already here, they're 20 years old, and they provide a great shady edge. And what's particularly nice is the way that they, with the addition of the seats, they filter the edge between the retail, because I'm very conscious of Sydney spaces being commercialised, always commercialised and engulfed, and the trees and the seats give us a sort of a zone that it can be retail behind that, but then there's clearly a public space within that's sizable.
One thing that I love is that there's so much seating here, and it's so important, and we've been here for a couple of minutes now and already seeing different places used in different ways. We've even got the bollards there on Macquarie Street that are functioning like seats as well, and many of them located in the shade. So this must really fill up on a weekend day as well.
The other thing council do, which is really great, is they have these small foldable colourful chairs that you can move around, and they also bring out bean bags, and so there's to make a space like this work, there is that overlay of programming, and it's very important the way the council's managing it and bringing these other elements into the space that are temporary, and that adds another overlay.
The other thing that's caught my eye is the shade and the grass adjacent to the square, and you said that space was a transition space, almost like a threshold space that offset the church with the town hall.
Yeah.
How has that space been included or added onto this square?
Well, prior to this project, it was quite separated. There was a very formal garden bed that separated the lawn from what was Church Street Mall. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to break that barrier down and allow the lawn to come back out to the edge, but nevertheless maintain the heritage or the historic curtilage of the church or the boundary, and then have these seats that sort of incidental seats, walls that act as a bit of a filter. So it's clearly not the main thoroughfare. It's not where all the people are directed, but you can get there. And the lawn really offsets the formal square very nicely, that you can sit on the grass and have some shade and or be on the formal square at the markets.
And how has the council and also the people of Parramatta responded to this square?
Well, I think initially there was probably a bit of sense that it was very harsh and it was something that people weren't quite used to, but I think now it really has become very much the place where there's always people in the evenings. It used to be very unsafe, people wouldn't come here. Now you see families here, you see church services on the lawn, they have their events, and I think it's really become a bit of a meeting place. The other thing that's particularly nice here is that the population is very culturally mixed, and so there's large groups of Indian, and the men will all be together and the women will be together in one spot, and the square the way it is now gives them the flexibility to be outdoor, spend a lot of time here but be in groups and move around according to the climate.
That's wonderful. That's really picked up on that multicultural aspect of Western Sydney. We can see in the background that there's ongoing construction. We can hear it as well, and that's really about that shift to the centre of Sydney's population here in Parramatta. So a place like this is so critical to putting design on the forefront and actually creating great spaces for people.
Yeah, indeed, and Parramatta Square will, when it's finished in another 2022, so it's going to add another major section, and it picks up on some of the geometry, and so we've tried to keep the materiality, we have kept the materiality going, not to detract from this. It'll be quite a different space, but it will certainly add a massive area of public open space to the centre of Parramatta.
Before we finish up, I know that we've got the old clock tower, or the little clock tower, and I was interested, I guess, in how as a landscape architect you deal with those significant pieces of heritage.
Well, I think it's firstly it's obviously important to retain them and to work with them, but I think it's probably about layers. You just keep building layers. You don't want to throw out. I think starting with tabula rasa is always terrible. When you have that sense of character, and it's not just the clock tower. There's the horse on the corner there. There's the patina and the fabric and the change of scale adds a richness, and hopefully what we're doing, we're not redesigning the space, we're just adding another layer that builds on that richness and allows it all to sing a bit more.
Thank you so much for your time today. I think
Welcome.
Finishing on this idea of patina is beautiful. You've added another layer and the story continues.
Thank you.